work from our legal department, and that is one area that currently we're not staffed appropriately to do some of the new tools. The new tools that we do talk about, there's some of these that we could probably do maybe once or twice, maybe in a year, but if we want to get more into it, which I think there is the opportunity, that is a resource that we do got to look at. With that, I'll turn it over to Tess Cody. Tess, this is, I know, her first time in front of council. She's our property redevelopment specialist. When we reorganized into the neighborhood services department, this was an activity, property redevelopment, that we have always done through community development, but it was always scattered amongst various employees. But with Blitz on Blight coming on and knowing that we're going to have a lot of vacant lots that we're going to result as a part of that, council did authorize to have one person focus specifically on property redevelopment. So with that, Tess?
All right, make sure I know how to work this. So Tess Cody, as mentioned, excited that you're taking some time to talk about these tools this morning. As Chris mentioned, we wanted to start things off by just really talking about what's the issue, really center it on the idea of addressing vacant, abandoned, and blighted properties, really where all three of those attributes are there. So what we're talking about is not necessarily going to be where it's just vacant or where it's just blighted. Those homes with those challenges are probably best suited for other programs we have, like, say, the ION program, vacant property registry. This is really looking at a small sliver of the properties that probably have the most encumbrances facing them in Des Moines. But as we talk about that kind of sliver, there's been lots of research nationally about the impact that those properties have on our neighbors, on our neighborhoods, on our cities as a whole, but wanted to provide you with an example from here in Des Moines where the ones on the list that are about loss of density, loss of housing stock, and tax revenue kind of all meet. So back in 1985, the city published an article in the newspaper where they actually named 51 houses that they identified as vacant and blighted. Some of them were likely under a little bit of rehab, so they were not all entirely abandoned, but a large subset of that list would kind of meet the definition that we're talking about here today. And as I was researching, I was like, well, this is perfect. Let's find out what happened almost 40 years later to these homes. And when looking them up, it was a little bit bleak. So when there's limited intervention, these are really tough to tackle. And so looking through it, about 14 are still standing. So that's probably the ones that had that start of the rehab I mentioned. 36 were demolished. And of those, 11 had new homes built on them. So about half have homes. Half of our housing stock right there, I think, is a pretty big note to make. Some of those are now side yards, adjusted property lines. You think like 3 becomes 2, and vacant lots. And I think when we think about our property tax base, that's part of that, right? Side lots, less property tax revenue compared to one with a structure.
Current vacant lots from 1985 that are they not able to be built on?
No, I don't think that's true. I think they're just vacant lots. So all I was doing is what are they today? And so today they are vacant lots.
There may be liens.
There might be liens. I think.
I wonder if they still are owned by the same people.
I can think of at least 2 of them that I think are actually owned maybe by Mercy now, and so I think they're kind of positioning to do some builds. So okay. I think maybe there's stuff to come.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So kind of thinking with that, we were trying to figure out, okay, what's getting in the way. And kind of actually, as you mentioned, right, liens are part of that. There's lots of title issues facing these properties. So the private market, some of those title issues are so complex or just so expensive that they really don't make sense for a private developer or rehabber to step in. Some of them also have issues where owners have walked away, and so even if you try to call the owner of record, they're not responding. Or the owner's been deceased maybe even for a long time, and there's nothing has changed ownership, and so there's just not a person you can go and regularly buy the property. And the other thing to kind of keep that we have heard over and over from some of our development partners is when you're doing infill housing and you're doing scattered rehab, it's really expensive. And when they compare to, say, a full development or something like that. So the math is just a little bit trickier to make work. So I thought it'd be helpful to just have some tangible examples. This one's actually on the council agenda tonight, 29 Hartford Avenue. Currently has a structure on it. We got this tax sale certificate pulled over from the county. The county held the certificate. One thing to highlight on here is that large amount of other taxes and special assessments. What happened was this property, the prior owner had suspended taxes. So there's a program for folks who are low-income older adults where they can suspend their taxes and they become due at the time of their death or if they resell the property. And so this kind of big backlog becoming due suddenly is a big problem. In addition, just as a quick note here, so because of the age of the tax sale certificate, it had a large amount of interest. So even if somebody went to try to redeem this tax sale certificate, we'll get into what's a tax sale certificate in a second, there was an additional $67,000 of late interest. That is a mess. You know, as a private party going in to try to say purchase that, you'd have to bump into all of these things. So we secured the property through the tax sale and put it out for an RFP to find someone. It needs significant work, and so the best offer we received was $30,000. They estimate that they'll have to put another $120,000 in it before they can turn around and sell it as a habitable home. So this is an example of the genre of properties we're talking about. But I'm excited actually about this one. I think good things to come.
Yeah, so this home could be rehabbed? Someone thinks it could?
Yep, so this is a property that the proposal is for a rehab. Yep.
Wow.
And the big way to get to it for this one is us pulling away all the stuff that's encumbering the title, because you couldn't deal with the $83,000, let alone the $67,000 in interest, and still invest in the rehab budget. Yep.
Other than the other taxes and special
It
assessment?
is, yeah, yep, that's late interest if you went to redeem the certificate as a private person to make it so we couldn't pull the certificate. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's really 150 in encumbrance.
It could be. We didn't have to release the late interest, you know, because we didn't have to pay it. So I felt like I'll try to be honest and say what we did.
But the house has been vacant for
Many
probably
years.
close to 8 years,
Yeah, many years.
at least.
These are all taxes between us
Yep, special assessments as well, so
for property.
mowing, board ups, things like that. Yep. This next one I have is an example. I think I put it on here because it was also on the last council agenda. We sold this property to NFC. It's a vacant lot, but this one I think kind of gives a little bit of a flavor of the things beyond just taxes and special assessments that will come onto properties that intimidate and kind of push away private developers. So we actually demolished the structure on this property and our demolition lien was on there. And so I think sometimes tax sales will wipe away demolition liens, sometimes they won't. And so if that's going to linger after, that's a little bit dangerous, right, for somebody to come in and want to build. This one also had 2 felony judgments attached to the property, and so we had to figure out how to navigate releasing those judgments from the property. So again, this is one where it had about over $80,000 against the property. If you add in that late interest, again, you get close to the $90,000 mark before you've done anything. Just clearing things away. Again, infill housing is expensive, and so they're anticipating putting an additional $265,000 into the property, and we'll probably be able to resell it for about $225,000. But again, really excited. This one's real close to a park. I think it's going to be a great addition to the community. So I put this slide in here just to kind of try to wrap our heads, and I put it mostly as a placeholder. So I don't think we have a tangible number quite yet about what's the scale of this kind of intersection of blighted, abandoned, vacant homes. But I think we're getting close to where we have a lot better information than we did before between the vacant property registry. I think just reviewing our what's on blight cases. I think that there's just a lot more information becoming available, so we will be able to start to zero in on this. But I also wanted to highlight, I think as a department, we're really trying to think about, okay, what's the right vehicle for the right house? You know, not every house is going to want to come through a program like the programs we're talking about today. Some of them might be able to be dislodged by the vacant property registry or others as they kind of really come into, hit their stride, would be the way to say it. So more information to come, but substantial. I think there's a significant number of homes.
With the number that we're looking at, you said infill just for a single just one lot. Is there any way to group those together so a builder could get a group and say, you've got 5 at a time? And so
Yeah.
it makes it scalable, not that you're going to be all right in a row, but they could be within the same neighborhood, so you could scale it up.
Like we're on the same wavelength. Read in my mind. Yeah. So no, it's good. We'll talk about a tool that I think is kind of designed with that in mind in a little bit, but I think that's worth keeping in mind because that's one thing that's been brought forward to us is the how do you bundle things? So even if they're not immediately adjacent, could we be doing multiple within a couple blocks so our crews can kind of be out in one area? That's exactly the right vein. Yep.
So do you know how many vacant lots we have
What I
specifically?
Yeah, so I think what we've been starting to work through is trying to figure out, you can, this is going to sound really silly, there's a lot of vacant lots out there, but some of them are side yards that are actually kind of, you want them to be that.
Yeah.
There are some that are not buildable, and then there are some that's like, yes, that's where we want to really focus our efforts. And then there's some where we want to focus our efforts there because we know no one else will, because the big stack of bills. And then there's some where it's like, oh no, it's better that we not intervene. The private market can go out and can purchase that. So it's what we're working on is getting better at figuring out when we know that and when we don't. And so, but I do think I would start with the list of when you think of the number of Blitz on Blight properties, right? Those are vacant lots. They all have liens on them. And the majority of those liens are there, or else they're going to tax sale, and the tax sale's the thing clearing it off. And so when you think of the scale of that over a couple of years, you have at least that many. So I am not sure that I know the exact number of that, but it's many.
But, yeah, and to Joe's point, I mean, I think, for future reference, I mean, it'd be nice to just have data, and
Yeah.
you listed 4 or 5 categories. I mean, so it'd be nice to have a sense of, okay, there's this many vacant lots, but we think they're candidates for the private market. So there's this many that have liens or tax difference. I mean, it'd be nice to have a sense of the scale of the issue. Because I assume there's a resource question at the end of this somewhere in terms of how we allocate resources. Better informed we are from it, figure out not just short term but over the long term.
Yeah, I think we can get there. I do, especially because I think you have the vacant lot question, but I also think you have vacant properties that could be rehabbed, but needs the intervention to do it. So I think you have that bucket too. I think we're getting closer to both those.
Right, and that bucket, if there's no intervention, that bucket then becomes demolition bucket. Gets them a nice back.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I'll
That we're going to end up waiving to ever get anything done to any of these properties. So, I mean,
Yeah. No, yeah, which bill do we want to pay, kind of a question. Yeah. I think that's great. We can
we
definitely.
want to get houses built on them so we can start getting taxes from them.
Yeah.
We're never probably going to get back the liens on them, I would think.
The value loss in the neighborhood.
What's that?
So,
Right.
Tess, the Blitz on Blight, the alliteration is nice, but this hardly feels like we've made a blitz. And I think that's one of the troubling things. Well, if this is a blitz, like, why are so many homes abandoned still? So you might think of renaming this. It just doesn't feel like we're blitzing anything. So.
Well, and not only have we blitzed them, but now we have a bunch of lots that have grass that's a foot tall that now we have to call your department to get the grass cut, or to have neighbors park their cars in the vacant lots. And, so now we've gotten rid of the home, but now we have a vacant lot sitting there that could be buildable, but we've got all kinds of other things, but we don't even know how many we got.
Yeah, the number of questions, we are getting to the bottom of that. The Blitz on Blight, it is a long process. I think right away from the start, we got out of the gates with those that were kind of backlogged, just waiting for the demo resources. We have the demo resource, but I think now where we're at, the court process is a very long process. It is. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think the latest, I think we have about 30 that are in engineering that are going through demolition. So it is picking up a little bit just with regard to that, but there's a longer pipeline it's not in our department, it's not in legal either. It's in the court process, just waiting to get a court date. But it does take a lot. It does take a while though. But the one thing the point needs to be made is after we're done, we haven't been focused on those lots that are left with the liens
So it
on
looks
it.
just as bad
Yeah,
almost
yeah,
for the neighborhood.
yeah.
And
So-
I mean,
Hopefully the tools that we are talking about today has helped to get to put a house back on those properties.
It's actually really funny. It's like, again, you're reading our minds. We wanted to just name that, right? Like looking at tools so we can provide some ideas for life after demolition, realizing that we've kind of done one phase of addressing some dangerous structures, but how do we actually recognize that those are still probably blighted properties, right? That all that weeds, junk and debris, those issues are still a problem. And then I think just kind of digging into this more, I've just named that there are lots of paths into why properties become blighted and abandoned. And so really needing to think of the many ways to help them get out of that status. And so these are just expanding that toolkit. And just recognizing this is like one hefty chart I've put up here, but really centering, there's lots of tools the department has been building out over the last few years, really kind of meant to address a wide range of owner engagements as well as condition of property. What we're talking about here is how do we increase the number of tools we have for vacant, abandoned, and poor condition property. So this is going to be the speed tour of redevelopment tools. We can spend extra time on any of them, and we can, of course, come back if there's any that you think you could just use more information about. So the first one I've mentioned, and I think you all are fairly well versed on, is the tax sale. This is a tool for acquisition. The county treasurer sells unpaid property taxes and special assessments and issues certificates for those. Certificates are then, through lots of waiting periods and notice, a path to secure a tax deed for the property. One of the important things for the tax sale specifically is things that predate the tax sale will largely be wiped away. And so this can be really important for pulling off a good portion of liens and taxes and things that are burying a property. So a path to a clearer title is really important. Some of the recent ones we've done, we've had to do additional action and come to you all for additional requests because more things came on after the certificate were issued. So think we received a really old certificate that was held by the county. So it was a 9-year-old certificate. In the subsequent 9 years, more things happened, right? And so it's the catch-up phase. Yep.
I know that investors from all around the country that buy up these properties.
Yeah.
Do we have any, do we get to be first in line, or how is that determined? Because I know there are investors in California that own a lot of these properties that do absolutely nothing with them.
That's a great question. Yeah, there are some special powers the city has, and one of those is we get to submit a list kind of right at the start. We technically send it in early because we have to do roll calls, but right at the start, those come to us first. And so that's a really powerful tool because private investors, it's a random kind of like, okay, do you get to bid at this? It's a draw. And so our ability to kind of pull and say this specific one. The limitation we have is they have to be vacant, that's what we want. We want vacant structures. And for the majority of the types of, there's a couple different routes within the tax sale, but the majority have to have a housing and use. So as long as we can say, yep, those things are true, we can kind of jump the line, if you will. Yep. But we have to also know that in a really tight timeline.
That's really hard to do,
It
too.
is, yeah. Yeah, and so we do our best, but so if there are some that you want us to keep an eye on, because you want to know, that's helpful for us to know, because the list that comes out is thousands long, and so it's hard to always fully know. We're getting better with data, but it's tough, yeah. So the tax sale. Because we've been successful at this one, wanted to provide you an example. So 1509 East 36th Court, this was a property that had many issues with junk and debris and abandoned vehicles. It had a fire on the property and eventually was demolished as a public nuisance. And so it had a lien against it. We received the tax sale certificate and processed that to secure the deed. And then we actually did a land swap. Man, I am tongue-tied. Swap with Habitat, but the valuation at the time was $15,000. Habitat built a home on it, but again, infill creates some infill housing gap costs, so we helped underwrite that with home funds to get a new home built there, and looking good. So that's the sort of thing that we can do, that can be the outcome with these tax sale properties. Second tool, again, this is the speed version, but this is one we're exploring. We have not, within the city's memory, used this tool in particular. Judgment lien foreclosure is when we would execute on our public nuisance, the judgment and lien on that, and that way we can go through a process to kind of, again, it's a court process, so have to have legal help with this, but we can secure the property. The downside when you compare this one to the tax sale is this will not clear away things like a mechanic's lien or a mortgage. We would have to bump in and figure out what to do with that. But for some of those vacant lots, there aren't those other encumbrances. We're kind of the only one in the way. And so I think using this tool strategically could make a lot of sense for addressing vacant lots where taxes, special assessments, and our demolition lien are the thing getting in the way.
And this property, I don't think this property has anything other than our $225,000 lien that we used to take the school down.
That's the big thing against
Yeah.
it. Yeah. That's the big one.
Well, this offers a great opportunity for rebuilding in your neighborhoods with, I think.
Yeah. So this is the one that we're hoping. This is our first go at it. So this is what we've been prepping for, is for this one to be the first go. So hopefully you hear more from us in 60 to 90 days. We shall.
How big is that? How many lots is there?
It's like 4 acres, isn't it?
I think it's just under 3 acres.
So
Was a school.
will you sell it to one builder and then they'll build, they'll plat it out and build it, or how's that going to work?
I think our intention, if we're able to acquire the property, which again, still an unknown, but if we're able to acquire the property, I think we want to do some community engagement with the neighborhood and with others to really help create the vision for what could go there, because I don't think it necessarily needs to be all just single family. I think it can be something more, but we want to go through that engagement process to really find what's the best use. And so I think this would be another example. We'll talk about this in a moment of the city's tolerance with being patient and holding properties to find that best use. A lot of what we've done with the tax sale so far has been kind of the speed version, where it's like we don't want to hold property long for liability reasons. And so we want to always have that buyer in mind. We got to move it through quickly. And we've done that really successful when it's one-off lot. But it's really tough when you want to bundle or you have a larger property like this. So being able to hold the property will be really vital in this one, so we can get to that best use for the neighborhood. Yeah. So another tool we could consider the use of, this one we have not used in our past, but many other cities around Iowa have with good success. This is an acquisition tool again. It's using a section of the Iowa Code that allows us to petition for a title for abandoned properties. The house, it has to have a structure. I should say that. It has to have a structure. And it must be largely vacant and in violation of the Housing or Building Code. The code section actually has a whole long list of ways you could say, yep, this is an abandoned property. And so you don't have to meet all the lists. You just have to meet a bunch of the list. And it has to be for 6 months. The big thing to highlight with this one is Similar to the tax sale, this enables a clear title. So it wipes away a whole bunch of the things that are encumbering that property. So it could be really important if we are seeing structures that we think could be rehabbed, though rehab is not required. If it really needs to be demolished and that's the best path, the safest path, that is an option.
I think IRS liens might hold you up on some of these.
Could be. I don't know how they all bump into every single one of them. Yep,
IRS liens are really,
the tough ones.
So why haven't we used this before?
That's a
If
great.
it's been in our toolbox?
I think we.
It's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet. We have actually used it. Started processes on the Des Moines building, for example. It was used to start that process, and then what happens is then people come back and say, well, it's not abandoned. I haven't abandoned it, and so that's what you have to prove to be able to use the statute. But it's another tool that we're going to be expanding our use of.
Yeah, I can think of 2 buildings that are very visible that have been abandoned for a lot longer than 6 months that are still sitting there and with busted out windows and on a main corridor.
So my question, how does our vacant property registry fit into this? And does, like, by having a vacant property registry, does that mean they're not abandoned because they're registering them as vacant? Or if they,
That's if they registered them.
right, but if they sit there, I mean, if we have a property on our vacant property registry for 2 years, does that help make the case on something like this?
Yeah, it's definitely going to help in that matter. I think one thing with the vacant property registry, it's really helping us identify which structures are vacant through that. The goal with Tessa's position is to work closely with Dan's group, not only with the vacant property registry, but to help identify and then develop the strategy on what to do next. So I think just by having that in place since the beginning of this calendar year, it's going to help build the case in some circumstances to be able to use the 657A.
and just for clarification, an abandoned, not every building that is vacant is abandoned. I've got a house in my neighborhood that's owned by somebody across town. He uses it simply for storage.
Yeah.
You know, he mows it and the neighbors are all saying, well, it's abandoned. It's not abandoned. It's full of all of uses it for a garage.
It's not vacant either. What is it?
I mean, nobody lives there. It's in poor repair, and I asked for it to be on the vacant building, but it's not abandoned.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, I know I know in one case, and I think you were referring to it earlier with the IRS lanes, where you have it and there's trespassers, there's squatters going in and out of the house. That's one I do think of that comes to this if you have no owner that you're able to engage with. I know you've had one in your ward that I could think of too.
There's a couple probably on
that
East
kind of crosses
14th.
this,
It's,
yeah. But I do know the fruits of what Dan's finding through the property registry. It's helping us identify, what's going on with the property, whether he's able to get contact with the owner or not. But I think from that information we're gaining there is to help Tess kind of identify, okay, this is perfect for this path. And then that we could use this tool to do something with the property then.
On the property registry or vacant property, are we having good success? Because I think at the beginning it was fairly low.
Yeah, I do have Dan here. I knew this. We thought this question was going to come up. So Dan could kind of give just kind of a real quick update, kind of numbers-wise, where we're at and kind of what we've seen.
Yeah, so far we have 45 paid licenses, which many of those are proactive, which kind of surprises me. We have 133 registry licenses where it's either not complied because of the condition of the property or they haven't paid for the license. And there's 500, Councilman Boss just gave me 2 more. So now there's 600 monitor cases that we have out there, which will in turn go to the registry as well as a code case if they're in poor condition. So the numbers are high, and these are just the start of it. We've only been doing this since spring, so they keep coming up as we go through the process as well. So
Is there commercial properties on there too?
Yep. Yep. The old McDonald's is on there. They have paid their license, but the property is still not complied due to condition. They're working on it, but
Well, I mean, when you call the number to even buy the building, no one ever calls you back. So I'm not sure what they got going on.
yeah, it's,
So wonder why it's been vacant for probably 15 years now. They don't want to get rid of it. So I hope they're paying their taxes.
but I will say that there's been several properties that since this has started, the owner has sent a notice to deregister on their side because it's changed hands and there's repairs being made. And so it is starting that process of taking these from being unused to at least they're getting sold and putting into someone else's hands to start rehab or something. So that's the right direction. Thank you.
So just to put a pin in it, I think that the hope is that over time, we'll find from a subset of that list what makes sense here. So this next one here we've done. One more we've actually done. The Blighted Property Rehab Program. This is a tool that's actually, think gap financing. It's supposed to help blighted, abandoned properties that come into new ownership for rehab and redevelopment to make the budget go. So it's supposed to be kind of the last dollars in, the thing to make it happen. We haven't done very many of them. We've done 6, and so far they've all been from 1886 to 1900. It's been really kind of a great partnership in the past with some of our staff that are really committed to historic preservation, and the outcomes have been pretty impressive, pretty beautiful. Right now there's $100,000 allocated annually. There's some carryover funds as we had some staffing change. But we have one, we just finished this contract, actually, of this property here. And we have 1 open contract and 2 kind of in the hopper is likely coming in. So I think you'll start to see some good stuff to come from this program. Okay. All right, back to the idea of bundling property. We get there eventually. So another tool that we could explore, and we started to put together the what would it take parameters around the idea of land banking. Land banking is a tool that's used around the country, both by, depending on the kind of local laws, by nonprofits and governments. It is, I think, the cluster of all the tools we've talked about so far. Add those together, and then add an additional option onto it of medium and long-term holding to identify best use, and that collectively together tends to add up to land banking. Land banking is really about addressing title issues and helping get properties kind of unstuck. It is not forever in a land bank. So you might have heard folks within the community talk about a community land trust. This would be adjacent to that. A land trust would be perpetual ownership affordability. This would come in and come out, right? So it's more about addressing the title issues, finding the best use. The chance to have some of our redevelopment tools come alongside our planning efforts as a city. So I really like this graphic because it kind of shows the idea of kind of moving through of a tangled up blighted property back into private ownership, but the land bank being the vehicle that helps pull the gunk off and help find the end use. Last tool that we have for you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, land bank's been talked about since before I was on council.
Yeah.
I mean, what exactly is the status? I mean, do we have legal barriers to do this, or can we do it and we just haven't? Like what? Like explain. I need a refresher on that.
So it is possible, but and I'll have others jump in. But that strategy requires more funding because you're talking about purchasing these properties, maintaining them in the meantime to hold them for possibly several years to get to that number of properties that could then be put back in an RFP or possibly a higher use, higher density product. So
We are
It's really been the
maintaining
budget.
them, though, aren't we? I mean, they're not mowing the grass. I mean, we got to call now our weed commissioner to maintain it. I mean, we are maintaining
it anyway.
these things.
Right.
No one else is.
Yeah, through nuisance
Yeah.
processes, yes.
Probably, I know at least 15 years we've talked about this. It's always been a resource issue, you know, to acquire the property, to hold the property. There's liability questions that come with holding the property. But I mean, you're exactly right to some extent. You have a vacant lot out there that someone else owns. There's a bunch of liens on it. We maintain it at the end of the day, or the county did previously. But the government just doesn't own it. So really what we're looking at through this is to take that next step for ownership, but then being able to assemble and look at prospective builders, redevelopers for
To
redevelopment.
turn it around faster.
Yeah. This really gets after the question of, you know, if the scale's too small to do one property for redevelopment, if you could assemble a dozen of these in a specific geographic area and then being able to go out to a developer to redevelop it, makes it a little more enticing for them to do. I know the dollars, we've looked at this. I think it's around probably about $500,000 to get started, to get invested, and to get in the property. I know there's been legislation, I think, at the state level. There's ways that the city can do this, but I mean, it's a resource issue, you know, at the end of the day.
But can we not,
Yeah.
not to?
When you say it's $500,000 to get started, I mean, part of the cost is the ongoing operational cost of maintaining the property.
Yeah.
So $500,000 acquires X number of properties, and then what's the ongoing cost in that case?
Yeah, I think so we started to draft a proposal, and maybe that's something we can see as it kind of gets all finalized. But I think what we had put together was an idea of about 20 properties into the land bank a year at that kind of $500,000 mark. Some of them would quickly come out, right? So that's back to the if I can actually go backwards. Maybe can't. The short-term kind of outs, some of them would stay in and hold over longer. And so if you had some coming out at the 3-year mark, some coming out at the 5-year mark, right, as you kind of move through it, but about 20 coming in, sitting at about a regular kind of in-out of 40, it would build up over time. And so when we built the budget too, and this is some of the conversation that I think, while we tossed out $500,000, that would be $500,000 in new funds. If we aligned with our other existing funds, like our CDBG dollars, or other dollars within blighted property rehab program, right? You start to kind of make those all move in alignment. So the dollar figure could be higher if you don't want to move those in alignment. You might want to. But I think we've started to draft some of what that would be. And I think while we put together that with the number 20, we were kind of looking at our existing neighborhood services staffing capacity, not our legal staffing capacity. That is another conversation. But I don't think we were using that number of 20 necessarily thinking through what we don't currently have, that tangible number of like how many properties would make sense in this space. And I think we're getting close to that, but I think weeks to come.
So couldn't we take dollars, Scott, since I know we're not using all the dollars we have allocated for Blitz on Blight, and refocus them on whether it be land bank or whether it be, you know, marketing some of these vacant lots. I know even if it's a single lot, if it's white clean and we're able to give that to a developer to build a single family home, I mean, I think the market's there to do that infill, even if it's one instead of, you know, holding it and trying to gather 5 more. But I know that's important with some, but I mean, I think we're not able to tear down as many houses with the Blitz on Blight. So there's dollars that can be spent instead of tearing something down. Now we need to either land bank it or market it to sell to, you know, a private builder, or eat some of the costs. We are maintaining them. I mean, let's not fool ourselves.
Already.
Every house that we're taking down, we're maintaining that lot, or at least we're trying to. Whether we get complaints and have to turn it in, I mean, I see it every single day. I mean, we finally tore down a house on South Union. It's had the grass mowed twice by us. It has a car towed away that was parked on there. We've got another car that's parked on there. I mean, we need to market it. There needs to be a house built there.
Yeah. So a couple things. This absolutely, we need to expand this toolkit in this area, and then it needs to include land bank and an ability to hold property a little bit longer. The best targets are always going to be those that have good property around them as well, and like other single-family homes, preferably even. And that's not always the case. Some of the tougher properties are maybe on a border of commercial properties, things of that nature, that would be harder to envision a home going in. That being said, there's plenty of other targets that we could. That's where we tried to look at this 20 or so a year as a target. But the other aspect of this is that we have limited funds in those other tools that we're currently using. And it's going to be the same funds that we're going to need to utilize for this, anything we grow in programming. So it's going to be a question for us to determine what that balance needs to be. And so we need to come to not only with, this is a good tool and we want to do 20 of these a year, but that's in coordination with the Blitz, because you're right. The other thing here is that we're not utilizing all the funds currently with Blitz, but understand that the funds that we have put into the Blitz on Blight does have property associated with it that's in the pipeline. And so if we start taking funds away from there, there will be concerns about, is there enough money sitting in that purpose for Blitz on Blight when the property gets out of the court system, finally.
Well, by that time, we'll probably have a new house built on one of these, and the tax abatement will be gone, and we'll be getting money because it takes about that long to get it through the court process.
Right.
Not that we haven't already, but is there a long range, you're putting together a long range plan of what costs could be incurred, and so we will have some idea. So if you do the 20 homes, how many more houses are in the court proceedings on the Blitz on Blight? So we can get some idea of then what is the financial impact if we truly want to move forward and make faster strides on revitalizing these areas.
And so
we're trying to do.
Part of this morning was to understand these tools well enough that we can come back to you to show you the dollar amounts annually, strategically, that we think would make a good balance, and let you react to that and say, actually ION's up and going, but they are funded at a level that's probably about a third of what their need is. And you got Invest DSM, the funds going towards those 4 areas as well. And then you got Blitz, and you got some of these others, and then we do have CDBG funds and some other funds available to us. But once you feel comfortable with what tools we're putting out there, and it's clear I'm hearing that you like each of these tools, then we can show you what the numbers would look like on an annual basis and what that would mean to your neighborhoods, for which you may find you want to spend more on owner-occupied assistance through ION versus the blighted side of the spectrum. So,
and just I'm sorry.
And it also depends on our budget and moving forward. I mean, we always are concerned about what goes on up the hill here and what's going to happen moving forward. We saw what happened this last year, and we're concerned. We've got these great ideas and some processes that we could move forward that would be really beneficial to, cleaning up property and getting them back on the tax rolls and improving neighborhoods and doing all that, which has been the plan for a really long time. Problem is it's all about money. And we're concerned about our revenue sources and what some of those folks up there are thinking about how urban areas of this state function and what they need to do. It's interesting to travel around our state and see other cities that have similar issues. I believe that we're really moving forward with plans specifically to try to counteract some of this negativity that's happening with these dilapidated, rundown properties. And I think that the strategies that you're presenting today make a lot of sense, and all the input that we've gotten today from our council members is positive and adds some questions in detail that some need to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But money is going to be the thing that's going to help us move forward.
In both an operating sense for staffing as well as the capital dollars. So it hits both our budgets.
And my question was I just want to make it clear, just because we go through the legal process that takes several years to take a property down, we still don't own it. So we can't land bank what we don't own. And we don't want to own it because I don't want somebody tripping on the sidewalk and then suing us for, $1 million. So the land bank only works if we can get clear title to it,
Right.
which is the holdup.
Right.
Which is the
and other
holdup.
tools, yeah. Yeah, you have to land bank, you have to have those other things in concert.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I mean, the ones that I'm familiar with, there's so much stuff with it. I mean, Wallace School, we don't own that. We took it down, but we don't own that land.
Right.
So then I mean, to Linda's point and to others, I mean, so if we don't own it, how are we marketing these? If you go back to your original slide where, we had the cost of all of those, and then we ate the cost of it, that doesn't come out of our budget because we didn't have that, right?
It's uncollectible.
Right.
Yeah.
So we ate the cost of it.
Yeah.
But do we own that property so we
We-
can go and market it?
We did actually, we took ownership of those properties I showed you, 29 Hartford and 1012 Southeast 10th. We took ownership through the tax sale. So we used one of the tools we've showed you today to take ownership so then we could clear away the encumbrances and then sell it on to, in one case, a rehabber, in one case, a developer.
So what about so there's vacant lots that we've taken down the homes. Do we own the vacant lot or we don't own the vacant?
We don't, so we don't currently own them, but the idea would be potentially we could use one of the tools named to secure ownership.
The goal would be to get the ownership.
But if it's just one single lot, are you talking about in one specific area? We're going to wait till we get down other homes in that area to take down and land bank it together? Or are we just going to put that with all over the city, a bunch of single-family home lots that we're going to sell individually to folks? I mean, I'm not understanding what our tactic is here. Because I feel like we've got a bunch of vacant lots, and if we need to go in and how do we get control of them so we can sell them so we can get new homes built on them? I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Whatever land banking, whatever you guys want to talk about, we need to get the property under our name so we can sell it because people will build on it.
Yeah. Do my best to be brief. Our current practice right now is we wait till the house gets in poor enough condition.
Yep.
We go in, we tear it down, put a lien on the property sits, goes through the tax sale process, city comes back in, acquires the site on tax sale, clears the liens, works with the developer to redevelop the property. That takes a long time. What we're talking about with a lot of these tools is what can get us in there right away to take action before we go through that whole process. And some of these, if we could use the 657A to get in there, to take it instead of going through the traditional public nuisance process, that's going to save time. The land bank, where that comes in, I think this gets at exactly what you're after, is where you have a number of these lots that are kind of scattered. Just think your ward.
Yeah.
Where we've identified that if we're able to acquire 10 to 15 of those lots, we could take ownership, we could assemble those together and market those out for redevelopment.
Okay.
And that's what the goal would be. Now, granted, the geography could expand a little bit bigger.
But they're not all lots right
next to each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing that could happen is if you do have that, you could assemble the bigger parcel to have more density there, or a different type of development. Even on commercial corridors is a way to think of it too.
Yes. And we have a potential on a commercial corridor in my ward to do that.
Yes.
Tess, going back to the tax sale, is there Could we be more strategic about that? And like, I don't know, you can restrict out-of-state people from, or out-of-state parties from buying the, but, or, because if the properties go out of state, then it's just tougher to lasso this and.
So that's state law.
Yeah.
That's state law with county
Yeah,
So there's no way-
implementation.
But you said there's something about we can jump to the front of the line. If you
So,
could.
so there's two things there. So the county runs the tax sale, and so they get to set the parameters of how the tax sale happens and how people register. So that out-of-state question, I think that's a great question for the county. However, it's also where I think within the realm of what we can control, when somebody comes and purchases up a property through a tax deed, that's a great time for our vacant property registry to require that they have a local point person, right? Some of those things that are within that vacant property registry, that's how that will also hopefully start to encourage those out-of-state property owners to be better owners, hopefully. But that county question, that's a question for them. For us being able to jump the line, so what that really just means is we can submit a list in advance where we say these are the certificates that the city would like. And so those are the ones that get pulled off of the main list, and they come to the city first if they're still tax delinquent at the time of the sale. And so what we've done in the past with pretty good success is we've identified within that ones that we're going to kind of for the whole life cycle of that certificate, we're going to hold the certificate and process it to deed. And some, we also have the option after we receive the certificate that we could identify a development partner and assign the certificate to them, and that they actually process the certificate. We never take ownership. They have to do all the certificate work, and we've done that with some of our nonprofit developers with good success. The trick with those is they cannot be certificates that have really a bunch of other mess that go alongside them, because they can't navigate the $55,000 in cost, because they'd have to pay that, and it just they stay upside down. So strategically, we can actually do a few more things within the tax sale. Happy to talk ad nauseum about the extra powers we have.
So why can't we say we just want them all?
Do we have to, I mean, are you?
Well, I mean, seriously.
Oh, there's a, that's a great question, actually. So one reason is we can only request certificates on vacant lots and vacant structures.
Oh, that you could build a home on.
Right, so, and if it has a vacant structure, then we could request that one, work to have it rehabbed, just like 29 Hartford. But if somebody's living in the house and they just haven't paid their taxes, that really needs to stay kind of in that other side of it. Yep.
But ideally, we would get to that point, quite frankly.
Yes. So when is the city writing a check to the county for these things?
We do not actually write a check.
So they give you the certificate without any cash being exchanged?
Correct. Now, if we then assign the certificate, say we assign the certificate to Habitat, Habitat then actually has to pay the value of the certificate.
But if we
hold it and process it to deed, we never pay for the certificate itself.
And then we can turn around and get it to a developer that can build on.
The other way to think of it for like strategy one, short term, when we deal with tax sales certificates, we're thinking short term. We have somebody on the other end that's willing to take it, or we have a high level of confidence that we could go out for an RFP and someone's going to take the property. We're not looking at it for short, medium term, or the long term when it comes to the tax sale.
But we could.
Correct.
Yeah, but those aren't in the middle. I mean, I'm talking about ones that are in the middle of the neighborhood that we tore down the house, that we need to get some infill in there. And we should be taking all of them and finding partners that want to build these. They're there. I mean, we need to do more work getting them to partner with them, taking the tax sale property at no cost and giving it to them so they'll build a house on it. So we're not mowing the grass now every 45 days
And I think the key there,
and
Council,
shoveling their sidewalk.
right? I think one of the keys there, Council, is that in some neighborhoods, there's multiple properties in that situation. And so the private market for building new is leery about picking off just one or two. So we may need to be able to stomach the idea of taking on 5 or 6 properties within a small area, within a smaller neighborhood, such that then removing all of that negativity in the properties suddenly leaves an attractive 5 lots in a neighborhood that can sustain new construction, such that the appraisal gap is smaller when you build a new home in a neighborhood that's shown that rehab.
I mean, there's been newer homes built in some of the areas that I'm talking about that are substantially more than the houses that were built there, and have no problem building them and gaining value in them. So there's potential out there that we could do this.
There is.
And definitely short term. Low cost. Need to find the partners.
What's left in the present?
You in a hurry, Josh? We're here.
All right, so
But I think it'd be helpful, just, we're starting to talk about how we use tools.
So the last tool that we'll talk about is on the council agenda tonight. It's a judgment lien release policy. Really what that policy is doing is formalizing some of the practice that the city's actually done in the past and clarifying when things will come to council, when things could be done administratively, just so that crystal clear. And also adding in a section for nonprofit developers where if they have the ability to potentially acquire a public nuisance structure, that the thing that's going to get in the way for them is the demolition cost, that they could come and talk to the city about that. The other thing that I think is kind of helpful in there is we also clarify and set out some boundaries of how a private developer could interface with that program. I think we've had in the past some success with private developers where they've asked for partial releases, but it gets a little bit more opaque in how to navigate if a full release was needed. So we'll talk about that in a second with 2 examples for you. So the first is one we actually brought to you all this past winter, 2229 Elizabeth Avenue. Habitat had a path to acquiring the property alongside a tax sale buyer who held the certificate. The tax sale buyer did not think that our judgment lien was going to pull off with the tax sale, and so they were going to abandon the certificate if they didn't have a path. So the way we kind of worked it out was so that tax sale buyer would process their certificate, Habitat would acquire the property, and we would release the lien. And this one I'm excited about because they're out there building right now. House is going up. Another example is 1125 Clinton Avenue. This is a private developer who came to us, and it is a kind of prime example of how messy sometimes this work can be. So we actually had a public nuisance case around 1941 Francis Avenue, a different property. And the public nuisance, when we demolish it, that actually attaches to every property within Polk County that property owner owns. And in this case, it included 1125 Clinton Avenue. That home started to fall into disrepair, and the owner was not in a financial place where they could address the repair, so they were working with this private developer to get out from under the property. And to help allow those repairs to happen and make the development budget work, we agreed to terms of a partial release where we just released from 1125 Clinton Avenue. It stays on the other property. We took a partial payment. So that was one example where, again, now 1125 Clinton Avenue is being rehabbed, which is very helpful. So those are 2 examples. As mentioned in the policy, it was really just to kind of help set and clarify boundaries so folks would know how to participate within the release program policy, and then adding in that clarification of how nonprofits could engage with demolition assistance. I think things coming up for you, again, is that lien waiver one. I just wanted to give you the heads up that we still will come, of course, with legal action, roll calls around the tax sale. We have to get permission to participate and bring you lists of ones that we want to process. Sales of property, come to council. Should we bring forward a land banking proposal that come in a future budget cycle? Things to keep in mind, scaling up, and some of these, they require staff time and notices. They require kind of mapping out how they integrate with other city processes. You've all identified it. A lot of this is really intertwined. How the vacant property registry meets this is really important. And of course, actually hashing out how the tools would really work, as some of them are new to us. And then really confirming when are the genres of times where we're comfortable holding property. So with that, there is our mega list of tools that we would bring forward for consideration over time.
We've actually just started the vacant property registry out in the field this spring. So since we've started that, we have seen several properties change hands. We are seeing property owners pull permits to do the renovations. So right, and so it's a process and it's getting started, and I think we're seeing great results with it. But it's pretty young yet too. We just started hitting the ground with it this spring. And that's the results we're seeing. So just not on the scale that I think you guys would like to see, but again, we're just hitting the ground with it. So.
I think that's all we had.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions, any thoughts?
Yeah, it was so kind of related. Community Land Trust, we're still having conversations about that. Is that within your department, Chris, or is that?
Yes, Jody Jurcevic works on it in our department. We're more just staffing it. It's not going to be anything housed, in our department.
Well, not,
Yeah.
but I mean the conversations, if
Yep.
that could move forward.
Yep.
And so you're continuing to loop in Amos
Yep.
organizers in that conversation.
Yep, they've been involved as well.
If they ask me how that's going, what would I tell them?
I think our next step, Jody, do you mind come up, just give current status? I know there's a consultant to help put the organization together, so I'll let Jody kind of just give the status on that.
Jody Jerswick, Affordable Housing Programs Manager. At present, we have a small team at the city. It's myself, it's Tess, and Paul Golbeck. We are working with a consultant. Her name is Brenda Torpy, and she is with the Champlain Housing Trust. She also provides technical assistance for setting up community land trusts. She is going to help guide us through that process. We are currently working on a contract right now. We are negotiating the scope. Once we get the scope done, we'll send it to procurement to start working on that. Then, once we have our contract signed, then we will begin identifying stakeholders and making a few key decisions, some very big decisions. And until then, I think our focus right now is that contract, and then working with Amos for planning and identifying how we're going to move together, and identifying their strengths, identifying our strengths, so that we work as efficiently and effectively as we can in putting this together. Any other questions?
Thank you. That's a great update. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, anything else?
But I just, I mean, I think this was to Joe's point, like what's sort of the next step? I mean, I think this overview of the tools was really helpful. Understanding how we allocate dollars to the various tools or staff time to the various tools and how that fits within a larger plan. A couple of the other pieces that maybe weren't here that, ION and Blitz on Blight and vacant property registry, all of those sort of fit in this larger plan. How do you envision this coming back to us? Because I think there are probably some allocation decisions that need to be made. And I'll just note that I think some of these might be a better use of dollars at this point than continued dollars in Blitz on Blight. I mean, I think we're maybe at the point where we're going after and spending a lot of dollars on a process for properties that maybe could be rehabbed in one way or another. And so using some of the other tools starts to make more sense.
So the intent would be to bring back these strategies on the redevelopment and kind of show you a smaller budget of where the sales tax could be spent on that, if there's any bond proceeds, and then general fund money for staffing, to kind of show you a small subset of the budget that deals just with redevelopment, for which those funds have some similar outcomes. So that way, I think we could get to a point where council would understand how we are investing in redevelopment. And with these tools, all of the tools that have the same access to the same funding. And that way, if we can make that decision in advance of the full budget, we could just plug that in to the larger budget. So I would say the timing of that would be late fall, early
Before
winter.
the budget.
Before the budget's fully.
Or as part of the
Together.
total budget, too.
There's an
separate?
opportunity to bring this in
Separate.
advance,
Okay.
just to be able to say, okay, if we can figure out how the city wants to redevelop, then we can plug those resources into the full budget when the time's right.
Do you have, I mean, I know that you know of not just nonprofits that build homes, but people that build homes for profit that are looking for a list to build homes in the infill. I mean, we know of them. I mean, I personally know of multiple ones of them. Well, that doesn't cost anything if we can get the tax sale for nothing. Well, I don't understand why we're making it very complicated, and you're making it a budget issue where we can turn around and market these ones that are already tore down, that if we can go and get the certificate and say, look, these are the properties we have. What are you interested in? What are you interested in?
Yeah. A lot of this is getting control of the property. I mean, that's what we always come back to. The Blitz on Blight, we tear down the house, put the lien on it, someone else still owns it. So it's what tools do we have to go after to secure that ownership? A lot of these cases, the private developer will try to get ownership, but they'll need some assistance from the city or some tool to do that. And that's where we try to step in to do these.
But is it
Financial
just
assistance.
paying the county, or is it paying other people that have a lien on the
It could be all the liens you saw in some of those
Yeah, the Des
examples.
Moines Water,
Yes,
I mean, are they
yes.
willing to work with us and waive?
They have.
I mean,
They have. Yep.
and
I think this lien-
nobody's going to get it if we don't build something
Yeah.
on there. So it would be in all of our best interests to waive it all and give it
Yeah.
to someone else to build it, like
The-
we've done in other places.
The lien waiver policy that's on tonight's council agenda is a big step. The message around the community right now is that if it's a private developer, it's not an automatic forgivable to be able to do that. So I think this is a step in the right direction to get us.
So what we're going to do tonight, it could be a step in that direction
yep,
to where,
yep.
here's the lot, go
Yep,
build a house,
yep.
let's get some people.
Allows us to waive the lien for
Let's get some
private
folks
development.
into
Yeah.
the house that can live there and
It
let's
gives them
put
more
something new to it.
flexibility to,
Okay.
And that allows the private developers and home builders to identify properties too,
Yeah.
and then come to us, because now they'll know you've got a policy to forgive all this.
Yeah.
I'm interested in these 2 or 3 properties.
Yeah.
Would you do that process for me?
Yeah.
And so it
Do we
will
have-
speed it
Do
up.
we have a list of the vacant properties? Do we have a
We,
list?
we have lists. I think for different builders, I think one thing we've always run to is the scale. They need a number of properties to be able to do it, and that's probably the bigger ones, that we've talked to. Some of the smaller ones, I think over time, we've worked with a variety of them. I know we got a group of rehabbers that we've worked with that are interested in taking, lots with existing structures.
The other thing, I just kind of going backwards a ways, like also keeping in mind that not all properties are tax delinquent. And so some of those with our demolition liens, they're also not tax delinquent. And so part of this is figuring out our own capacity in processing using more tools than just tax sales. So we don't have some of those where it's like someone's been paying the small dollar taxes on this and it's just been staying buried. And so I think that there's some of this too to keep in mind that we need, because there are many paths in, we need many paths out.
Okay. See what progress we can make, I guess, after tonight.
All right, thanks, Chris, and thanks, everybody, for the presentation and update. I think we're looking forward to a little more detail as we move forward, and a path that makes some sense and a strategy to get there, Scott, given the dollars that we have for all these plans to get something that moves forward a little more quickly. So thanks to everybody, and unless, Scott, there's anything else, we are adjourned. I don't think we have a closed session, do we? All right, so we'll see everybody a little before 5. Have a great day. Meeting's adjourned.